Hey guys, it's Makeshift, and today I'm going to show you how to joint your plushies. And what that means is that your limbs can actually pose by rotating on an axis. So on this plush here, which is Kyle from Animal Crossing, his arms are jointed and they have little plastic safety joints that connect the arm to the body that allows his arm to rotate on an axis like this. So it's not like my posable plush tutorial where his arm can bend and stay in place. This one is about rotating along the body so it could hold a simple pose like a wave or having both of his arms up like this. So nothing too complex, but it's still very easy to do and adds a lot of personality to your plush. So I'll talk through my favorite way of jointing a plush and let's get started. I like to use plastic safety joints to joint my plushies. I've also heard of people using buttons to make their joints move, and there's also hardboard as well, which is just another type of material, but these connect in a totally different way than these plastic safety joints. I find these joints easy to put on and simple in the way that you pattern your plush to accommodate for these. So when you buy them, they're going to come with 3 pieces. The first one is called the post, and it's just this long piece here. You can see that it has ridges along the post right here, and these ridges are what locks into the washer. There's also just a plain washer, and then there's this piece called the lock washer. So you can see how the lock washer has texture to it. It's got ridges on the inside, and that's what grips those ridges on the post to keep the joint in place. So the overall concept with the plastic safety joint is that one side has the post in it, and then the other side of the plush has the washer, and then you put the lock washer on top of that. Because it is a safety joint, once you get this on, it's really difficult to get it off, because the whole point of it is that it's difficult to come off because it's meant to be used in things like children's toys. So it's purposely very hard to get it apart once you put it together. These will come in a variety of sizes. Here I have a 20mm joint size, which is kind of medium-ish size. I have seen smaller as well, and there is larger, so just depending on the size of your plush, you want to get one that is a decent size because it needs to be strong enough to be able to rotate the limbs. So if you bought a joint that is too small for your plush, then it's not going to have the strength required to actually get the limb to move and to stay in place. Likewise, if you buy one that's too big, then it's just not going to fit inside of your plush. So I use these to joint limbs primarily, arms, legs. You could do it with a tail even. I don't use these to joint my heads. For that, I do use these hardboard joints that I mentioned earlier. And that set comes with 2 of these, and so you put one in the neck and then the other at the base of the head, and then you join them together. I'm not going to go through that process because it's totally different from the plastic safety joint method, but I haven't tried using these plastic safety joints to joint the head to make it movable. It's possible that if you get a size large enough that it would be successful, but I prefer using these hardboard because they come in a good amount of sizes that'll fit the heads of the plushies that I make. But I suppose if your plush is small enough and you can find a joint that's large enough, you'd be able to use a plastic safety joint. But I like the extra security that you get when you use 2 of these together. It just makes the head a little bit more firm to rotate on the point rather than this safety joint where it's just this larger post with these smaller washers. This type right here is my favorite, the one with the clearer looking plastic. I did previously purchase this version here, has a white post and washer and then this tan lock washer, and I have to recommend against this type. I literally could not get these joints to form together, so I could not get this lock washer to join to this post. And part of this video is going to show me working with these and I recorded up to the point of where I had to connect these and then I just could not do it. Apparently you have to loosen this lock washer with heat, either through really hot water. I was thinking even maybe a heat gun, but I don't have safety gloves to handle this after it's heated up to get it together, so I just decided to go back to my normal brand here, which unfortunately are becoming a little bit harder to find in the sizes that I want. But again, I'm gonna recommend not buying this kind here, which has the tan lock washer, because it is just next to impossible to put together. Just to mess around with it, I actually had to hammer the lock washer onto the post to get it down, but it's impossible to do that when it's on a plush, so try not to purchase this one here. So on the plush that I'm making, I'm going to joint the arms. And the first thing you need to think about is where you want your arm to be jointed. So typically this is going to be in the shoulder area. So this is my inside pattern piece for my arm, and I want my plush to be jointed right around the top middle of the arm piece. So this is the inside of the arm. There's another outside piece of the arm, which I'm not going to apply any of the plastic joints to. I'm only going to put the joint through the inside pattern piece of the arm. And this part is optional, but I did a little stitch line with my embroidery machine to mark where I want the joint to go through. The other benefit of this is that it's going to just add a little bit extra security to your piece, because you do need to cut through the fabric to insert the post like this here. And it just makes me a little bit more comfortable having that extra stitch mark around it, to where the fabric might not stretch as much over time or tear potentially, because I do have these stitches surrounding the area where I'm going to cut into. It's not that much of a concern with minky because it is a knit, so it's not going to be as at risk like one that would fray. So I don't always do this, but since I had my pieces running through my embroidery machine anyway, it's nice to, one, have this placement mark so that they exactly line up both of the arms, and it'll add a little extra security to the part where I'm going to cut. So you don't want this hole to be very big, but you need it to be large enough to where your post can actually fit through it. So you can see that this circle is just about the size of my post. And so now we're just going to snip a little hole right in the middle, and we're going to try to make it as small as possible, and then we're going to slowly make it larger as we need to, because we don't want this hole to be too loose, because then your joint won't fit as securely in the plush. So you're just going to take a really sharp pair of scissors and grab the area where you want to cut, and trying to get as much in the middle as you can. Just make a very small cut just to get you started. And I do have some backing here from where I did the embroidery, and I'm going to leave it on just because I think it'll add a little bit of extra stability, but again, that's also not necessary. So once I made a little cut, I'm just going to start trying to push the post through. And again, I want this hole to be as small as possible, so I don't want to start with a big hole, but it's not getting through at all, so I need to just keep making it wider. So I'm going to rotate it and do a cut from the other side, just so it kind of makes an X. So you'll notice that I'm not actually cutting out this hole, I'm just cutting little cuts into this whole area, just because I think if I actually cut out a big circle, it would end up being a little bit too loose. Okay, so now when I push, I can actually get this through. And so that's what it would look like from the side. But again, this piece is going to insert into the body, and this post is just going to go through this hole once we get it all assembled. But you want to make sure that the post can get through the hole you're making in the first place. So you'll see that it actually made its own little circle by pushing it through, as opposed to me cutting a circle. So again, just make small little cuts as close to the center as you can in that circle, and then push the post through so that you get a really nice secure fit. So now that I have my circle cut out from where the post is going to go through, I'm going to go ahead and finish up this arm as I would normally. So I have my other side. I'm going to sew it with right sides together, and I'm going to leave a small little area here to where I can flip it right side out, and then we are going to attach it to the body. Typically I prefer to go ahead and assemble the body before determining the placement of where the joint is going to connect, and I just usually find it easier to go ahead and start with the arms and put the post where I want it to be in the shoulder, and then determine the placement on the body rather than the other way around. But depending on your plush, it might be easier to start with the body and then determine the placement on the arm or the limb, whatever you decide to joint. But for me, usually I end up starting with the arm and then determining the placement on the body. So I have my plush stuffed and ready for the joint placement here. And so even though I'm going to put the post in the body when I'm done, I like to use the post to determine the placement of where I need to make an area open to insert the joint on the body. To keep things symmetrical, I recommend just determining the placement on one side of the body and then mirroring that placement onto the other side, rather than doing them both and potentially ending up with an uneven arm placement. So I'm going to have the joint go right along this seam line here on the side. And so then you can just take your arm with the post sticking out of it and kind of align it and determine where you think it would look best. And this is really just kind of placing it along the body, and then once you like it, you kind of see where that post lands, and then you can take a marker and mark where it's going to land on the body. You can see here I've already actually pre-marked this because I have used this pattern before, so I've put the placement in my pattern already, but that's because I have a seam line running down the side of the body. So I actually do a special method for putting the joint into the body on these plushies. Depending on how the side of your body is structured, you have a couple different ways of inserting the joint into the body. One is to do the same method that we did with the arm, where you're going to cut a little hole into the body to get the post to insert through. But my preferred method is, when I can, I actually like to just leave a gap on the seam line to where I can insert the joint through that hole that is created from not having any stitches in one area, rather than cutting a hole. So if I pull this open, you can see there's actually a little gap in my seam that I'm going to use to insert the post. If you do the method where you leave a little bit open on the seam, it can be annoying to do this process where you stuff the body, determine the placement, and then go back in and seam rip that area. It'll just take an extra step where you have to kind of assemble the body and then figure it out, and then disassemble the body to take out the seams. But it could be difficult to determine the placement of that gap if you don't know exactly how it's going to line up on your plush. You could potentially seam rip the seam with it already assembled, but with that you do run the risk of more stitches popping along where you seam rip it, since you're not going to have a back stitch at the top and the bottom of the area where you're leaving that seam open. So just determine if you'd rather run the risk of this seam opening a bit more. You could reinforce it with some hand stitching, but I do just do that extra step of assembling the body, determining the placement, and then taking the stuffing out of the body and then opening that seam after I've flipped it right side out, just so I can reinforce where that stitch is. I leave the joints for the second to last thing I do, the last thing being finishing the plush with hand sewing, so closing any holes that you have and then doing any other finishing touches that you might have. So my arms are ready to go. I have the holes cut into them for the post to insert through, and I like to insert the posts into the body rather than have the washers into the body, and that's because I can eyeball the posts coming out from the sides to make sure it's symmetrical. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the posts into the holes that I left in the side of the body. And you just want to try to feel that you don't have any stuffing between the circular part of the post and the fabric of the body. You want to get the washer eventually as close as possible to that circle part. And at this point, if you find that the hole you've made is too large, you want to go back and make that seam a little bit smaller. You could do this by machine sewing, which is probably the safest method so that you don't risk this seam tearing apart. But you could also hand sew it together with just a ladder stitch. If it's too small, then you could just seam rip the seam as needed, but then you're going to risk not having a back stitch. If you just seam rip it and then stick your post through, this seam is going to start tearing apart because you're going to get rid of your back stitch when you seam rip it. So if you do need to seam rip it, you probably want to go back in and machine stitch that seam securely. Okay, so now that I have my posts, I can eyeball them to make sure that they're symmetrical, which they're looking pretty good to me. Some of it might be the angle if you see that you don't think they're symmetrical, so just do some double checking. You can get a measuring tape and measure along your seams. So I'm just going to double check that they're precisely even and then move forward. So I'm going to double check that the posts are even by measuring from the head seam to the top of the post. So this is 1 inch here. And then this is also 1 inch. Alright, so now I can go ahead and attach the arms to the posts. So I've removed the stuffing from the upper part of the arm, so unlike the body where I wanted it to be stuffed, I have no stuffing in the top part of the arm. So now we're going to insert the arm over the post using that hole that we cut into the arm. So make sure that you're using the correct arm piece, that it's facing the correct way, and insert the post into the hole. Sometimes it helps if you put your hand inside the body and push out, just so that the post doesn't cave back into the body of the plush. Alright, so make sure that it gets all the way in there and that you're fabric is as close to the body as you can get it. At this point you can kind of test the movement here because you do have the arm inserted onto the post, but you don't have it secured. So you definitely want to do a lot of tests here because once you get that washer onto the post, it's going to be very difficult to get it off. So the first piece you're going to put on is the washer, which is just the plain plastic piece that doesn't have any ridges on it. And this adds some extra security to the whole piece. So make sure that you're not getting any fabric underneath the washers at this point in the process. You want this washer to be right up against the body because having that washer against the body flat is going to add the stability to the piece. And then it's not going to have the arm push out from the body and give it a strange look. So once you get that washer on and you're sure that you don't have any fabric underneath it, now you're going to take the lock washer and start putting it on. And this is where you need to be absolutely sure that you're ready to commit to this limb being attached to your plush, because once you get this lock washer on, it's very hard to get it off. So we're just going to go one snap at a time because, like I mentioned earlier, this post has little ridges on it. That's how tight the joint will be, is how far down you push this lock washer onto this post. So if you leave it at the very top, it's going to be very loose, and that's not an effect you want. You want it to be tight, but you also don't want it to be too tight because then it's not going to be able to rotate. So it's good to start with just pushing it down 1 or 2 notches and then start testing the movement of the plush and then push down more as you need to. So I'm going to put it on top and I'm going to make sure that I don't have anything in the way. And then I'm going to start pushing down. So that's one pop. That's on now, but it's not tightened. So I'm going to push one more time. Okay, and now I'm going to test the movement. So it's very loose. Even though it's not stuffed, the upper arm, it's still too loose for me. So I'm going to push one more time. So this is a little better. And now I'm going to stuff the arm to see if I like it and if I want to push it down anymore. Okay, so here's what it looks like. It's got nice movement, but it's not too loose. It can hold its pose without coming down at all. I also like to stuff the arm to where it's not as thick up here as it is down here to kind of help sell that shoulder look, so you have a nice line coming down from the neck down to the arm. So if I overstuffed this area up here, it would look more stuck on than it does where you're not having that fake appearance of a shoulder. So now I'm going to go ahead and attach the other arm. So again, I'm taking the arm that's been partially unstuffed, so there's no stuffing up where we're going to connect it. I'm going to put my hand in here to grab a hold of the post and insert the post into the arm. And then I'm going to take the plain washer with the flat side down, put that on first, make sure there's no fabric underneath it, nothing that you want getting stuck in the connection. And now take the lock washer, put it on. I'm going to click it once, twice I guess, move the stuff out of the way, and then one more time because my other joint had 3 clicks. Alright, and now it's on. So now I just have to restuff it. So you can see how easily that lock washer can go on, so just be very careful when you're putting it on. Now we're going to check the evenness. So they look good to me. The shoulders look even, the thickness of them is about equal, and then testing the movability. The movement also looks good, and I like the little hug or welcoming pose that they can do with the joints here. Find if you curve your arm a little bit in the pattern, so you can see here that it's not a straight line, but it's just got this subtle little curve. It helps add some life to your plushie rather than it just being a straight arm. It can not look as interesting as having this little curve here. So it looks good. So I can go ahead and do the finishing touches on this plush now, and that consists of closing up the holes that I had to have open to be able to joint this plush, and then just other odds and ends like cleaning up all the loose threads and everything. So let's go ahead and finish them up and then see what the final product looks like. So I got him finished up, so now we can see the movement on his arms, and he's got really nice range of movement. Can go all the way up, do a little scream pose, just do a cute little wave. Really like the both arms up look. I think it looks really cute. And it's really easy to rotate the arms when you don't put them super tight, but at the same time they're strong enough to maintain their pose. So looks good. Happy with how this turned out. So hope you guys learned something today, and maybe you can use this in your plushies. I think it helps add a lot of character to the plush, and really easy to do as well. So thanks for watching today, and see you guys next time. Bye.